Hey, AP Gov guys, Walswe're back. We are going to further take a look at the stuff that is the seedy underbelly, or depending on what your perspective is, it's either the seedy underbelly of our political system, or it's the necessary financial role in politics. All depends on what your take is on this. We talked a bit about the political parties. We talked about the perspectives of the two parties from a fiscal standpoint, with Democrats being more progressive and more think FDR minded, meaning social programs, social welfare, things like social medicine, free education. That's and John Maynard Keynes. The government can spend its way out of a recession. Okay, then the Republican side, which was the Adam Smith free market capitalism idea, and the strongest corporations will survive because there's an invisible hand. Less social welfare, just enough social welfare to help people, quote unquote, pull themselves up from their bootstraps. So that's the fundamental difference between the two parties. You throw in something like the Libertarian Party, where the premise is we're all adults, and if you're not hurting anybody, it's all good. And pretty strict constitutionalists, primarily first 10 Amendment people. That's sort of the Libertarian Party, sort of that first 10 amendments. And then you have the Democratic Socialist Party, which seeks to create a safety net, the British term cradle to grave. So when you are born, there's a social net for child care, for education, for job training, for when you get old, you go to a state or federally run adult care facility, cradle to grave. When you die, the state cremates you or buries you and hand you over. So that's sort of the idea, the British cradle to grave idea. And that's the Democratic Socialist idea. All of these ideologies have their strong points and their weak points. America is a country that, from our very foundation, struggled mightily with taxation. So when you start talking about cradle to grave stuff, it sends off all kinds of alarms, because now you're into that whole taxation question. And, we get hyper spooked by this and this, that, and the other thing. But those are just, I think you guys have a pretty good understanding of how the political parties kind of work, and what the main issues are for the political parties. So what is this soft underbelly? Well, look, you want to become a candidate for office, you are going to need money. Okay? That is the key. And in order to get money, you can be like Bloomberg and just be independently wealthy, and you can drop $1 billion, or I'm sorry, not $1 billion, but like $35 to $100 million on your campaign. Okay? And one of the things about Bloomberg is not only did he spend that money and then dropped out of the race, he then, he did give a lot of that money back to the Democratic National Committee, which is the Democratic National Committee is the recognized Democratic organization, and the Republican National Committee. These are the registered parties with the United States government, because a party has to be registered with the government. So Bloomberg was independently wealthy. You see this a lot. Trump was kind of independently wealthy. If you factor in debt to earnings, he's not much wealthier than the vast majority of us. But if you well, that's untrue, but he's not quite as wealthy as he proclaims. But let me give you, let's say an example. AOC, grassroots, where'd she get the money? Well, she eventually started getting support from certain political action committees, but she's done a lot of her fundraising kind of on her name, which is whether you like her or you don't like her, it is a remarkable example of grassroots democracy. So what are these things? Well, these entities. Well, I've already spoken about the Democratic National Committee. Okay, so we have a Democratic National Committee, we have a Republican National Committee. So the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee are funded, and you'll see, I'm going to try and get this so we get some of that light up. You'll see that if you are going to run as a Republican, and let's say you're going to run as a Republican against another Republican in a primary, there's a very small chance that you will be getting a tremendous amount of financial support. That's very difficult. AOC ran into that because she actually ran as a Democrat and upset a 20-year, someone who'd been in there for a very long time. It's difficult. It's difficult to challenge an incumbent from your party. It's hard enough to challenge an incumbent from the other party. At least if you challenge an incumbent from another party, you're going to get the full financial backing from your party in some cases. The amount of money you get will be 100% determined by, now first of all, there is a set amount of money that you can and must get from these committees. And I don't know what those numbers are. But even if you're running against an incumbent of the same party, the way it is set up in our government is that the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee, you can appeal to them for funding, and there's a limit or a minimum that they must get to you. Obviously, they spend the majority of their money on candidates who have a strong foothold but may be up against a challenger from the other party that brings a lot of weight to the table. That's where you're going to see a lot of this the sway go. And is it just money that these committees give? No. These committees will encourage things like political action committees to donate, lobbying committees. This is quite a network. So let's take a look at the interest group. Okay, now an interest group is a group, a political interest group that is there to raise awareness and stimulate interest in sort of a given issue. Okay, they represent a given membership. Okay, and they serve as this invaluable link between their members and politics. Now, these interest groups are important because as a politician, you don't have time to go and talk to everybody. So it's important for interest groups, and I'll go through a number of different types. It's very important for interest groups to have to be able to get, for example, the National Education Association's perspective to the governor. Right? That's important. The governor can talk to teachers all he wants, but he's going to go to the NEA to see if there's enough support. Right now, the American Medical Association. You would imagine that the American Medical Association's interest group is and that's an economic interest group. They bring a lot of weight to the table. And they are largely based on the economic interests of their constituency. So something like the AMA or the NEA, National Education Association, they are going to put pressure on politicians to, quote unquote, hear their perspective. You follow that? So because our governors or your congressman, your senator, your House of Rep, whether state or local, they rely on a lot of these interest groups to give them their support, thereby showing them where their constituency lies. Okay? So you'll see the National Education Association has endorsed so-and-so. Okay? Well, that doesn't mean every teacher is voting for that person. That means that the majority of teachers, most likely, that are a member of the NEA, which is a teachers union organization, the majority support a given candidate. What the individuals do is totally up to them. You do not need to vote with your interest group or your lobby. Okay? Interest groups provide information to the government, as I mentioned, and the big thing is data. And they, for example, the American Medical Association would be a good one where you would hear about the data behind going back to day-to-day life in COVID. So the AMA is going to give an opinion there, and they're going to back it up by data. Right now, the AMA is talking to their doctors and asking their doctors, what do you need? What do we need to tell your politicians? And that's what an economic or just an interest group does. It represents, it provides a channel for political participation, so that if you get together with other masons, brick masons, not National Treasure masons, if you get together with a bunch of other masons, your concerns about job safety will be disclosed to your local politician. He might not give a rat's ass about your concerns, but he's going to know your concerns. Okay? So that's what interest groups do. They raise awareness, they stimulate interest, they represent a membership, they serve as a link between members and government, they provide information to the government, especially data, and briefs and testimonies. And this is the primary channel for participation in the political process by the run-of-the-mill schmo. Okay? And the best example of that is a brick mason is probably not going to have a lot of political say, but his union will. So interest groups are they can both be this seedy underbelly, because there are definitely examples of interest groups trying to manipulate public opinion through, whatever means. But they're also a very important voice for the common man. They're, especially when it comes to, labor, the AFL-CIO, remember Samuel Gompers and Lewis. Samuel Gompers and Lewis, and my U.S. history needs some brushing up on. But, these are the Teamsters. Okay? And I know where I'm from on the East Coast, Teamsters Union is really powerful. And they're the ones who determine, which when you go to build something, you're using union workers. And that's because the AFL-CIO is a very powerful union, and that is also, that's an interest group, not just a union. And, the Chamber of Commerce is an economic interest group. National Association of Manufacturers is an economic interest group. The Granges, the various Granges, like agricultural, I forget what the name of the agricultural interest groups are. But remember when Donald Trump had passed those tariffs on China, the farmers were up in arms over that because they were the Chinese were going to stop buying American grain and various products. So instantaneously, the economic interests of the agricultural, the agricultural component of the American economy sector. The agricultural sector was instantaneously up in arms because we're going to lose a ton of money. Well, what happened there? Well, there were subsidies given to farmers during the trade war with China. Okay. Anyway, let's see. The economic interest groups also have like a standard, within the profession. It's not just political. They also, like the AMA, determines what the expected procedures are for medical professionals, schooling. They oversee the testing and credentials. The same with the AFL-CIO. If you want to become a union member, you have to meet certain standards. So these aren't just about if you are sued, they will be your defense. In whatever the particular case is. If you are injured, they will be your offense in many cases. Okay? So National Farmers Union, that's what it is, was the one that he had to sit down with, Trump had to sit down with, and he had to map out a strategy for making sure that they were financially taken care of during his trade war with China. So that was a really important part of that whole trade war. So then we go from there. We get into sort of the groups that are promoting really specific causes, and you guys know this is Colorado. So first and foremost is the National Rifle Association. The National Rifle Association is an interest group. It represents people that take their Second Amendment rights seriously. Myself included, and they spend a considerable amount of money, as do all of the causal-based interest groups, spend a lot of money primarily on advertising. Now, as far as giving to a candidate, this brings up something important. The most money that any kind of any type of group is allowed to give is $5,000 to a candidate. They can give up to $15,000 to a given political party. They can give money to a similar political action committee or economic interest group. And where it comes in, where they do most of their work, is it's unlimited spending. And I think I'm right on this. I might be wrong on this. It's unlimited spending when it comes to things like advertising for supporting a candidate in sort of alternative ways. That's where you start to see that big money coming in. Advertising, just, the NRA just being out there, and what they'll do is they'll take out angry ads or pro this guy ads. The NRA proudly supports this person. That's not money given to a candidate, I don't believe. But the AARP, when I turned 50, I started getting stuff from like the American Association of Retired Persons. That made me feel real good. I can't even imagine what it would feel like to be able to retire at 50, but whatever. They have you get a certain amount of discounts for being an old geezer like myself. Veterans of Foreign Wars, it has a cause that is to support the veterans. I'm trying to think of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, whose goal it is to protect your civil rights. So these are some examples of how these groups are able to play a vital role in the political process. Okay? And so all interest groups, just to review, they raise awareness, stimulate interest, they provide information to the government, because the government does not have enough time to go right to your house and get a perspective. They represent the masses, but not, there's probably a bunch of teachers that don't vote the way that the NEA, says they should vote. And they serve a very important purpose of providing a channel to the political system. Okay? Economic interest groups, AFL-CIO, American Medical Association, American Bar Association for lawyers, National Education Association. These are groups looking out for the economic interests of their people. Okay? The American Rifle Association isn't worried about your economic well-being. They are worried about your constitutional right well-being. So they're causal, okay, not economic. I'm going to put an assignment up for the weekend that will deal with legislation that sort of dictates and cracks down on the money and the way money comes in. And the next time I'll talk about lobbyists, political action committees, the media. These are all important topics. You're watching this, you're pausing it, you're writing stuff down, and then you're doing the assignments, and you're going to do real well on this exam. Miss you. We'll see you soon.